So today's lecture, Charlie in the Dig, offers his fascinating behind-the-scenes account of working on the Netflix film, The Dig, from his first unexpected contact with the production team to coaching Ralph Fiennes, an Ipswich boy, and the cast in authentic Suffolk dialects. Charlie's going to share how the actors prepared and how accents were crafted and the extraordinary dedication that went into bringing The Dig to life. So whether this is your first time of listening to Charlie or you've come back for another dose of his infectious enthusiasm, you are in for a real treat this evening. So without further ado, please join me in giving a very warm welcome to a remarkable storyteller, Charlie Haylock. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Evening. Is that the best you can do? Is that your East Suffolk Ipswich welcome for a lad from West Suffolk? I'm going to start again. Evening. That's better. Right, tonight's talk is about my involvement with the Netflix film The Dig. But before I go any further, to avoid any confusion, to avoid any case of mistaken identity, I'm the one on the right. There I was at home on my computer and an email came through. Right, already you've started. I'm giving you a talk about how I taught that man to have a Suffolk accent in the county town of Suffolk about a Suffolk accent, and already there's people laughing at some of the Suffolk words. Computer for a start. I've clocked a couple of you. Your cards are marked because I'm going to pick on you later on. Right, there I was at home, there I was on my computer, and an email came through. No subject matter, and that just say, Charlie, we want you to be Suffolk dialect coach, Netflix film The Dig, Redmond. And underneath, Redmond Morris with a few telephone numbers. I thought, this is a scam. Well, I called my partner over, Ruth, and I say, Ruth, what do you think of that? That's a scam, delete it. I said, before I delete it, I'm going to find out who this Redmond Morris fella is. I didn't answer the email just in case it was a scam. So I Googled him. And he came up, 4th Baron of Killannon Island, film producer, with a few telephone numbers. Well, I rang those telephone numbers up rather than the ones that were on the email. And he picked up the phone, Redmond Morris. I went, yep, that's Charlie Haylock here. I've just had a scam email from you. What? No. We want you, hearing someone cough. I must tell you this. This has got absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about tonight. But this was actually overheard in a Suffolk doctor's village waiting room during the pandemic. There they were, all spaced out because of COVID. No other reason. And then all of a sudden, old boy in the corner coughed. Not COVID, not COVID, not COVID. An old girl in the other corner in a broad Suffolk accent went, "Could blast, she say. I never thought I'd see the day when it would be more socially acceptable to fart in public than to cough." Thank you for coughing. So there I am, and he said, no, it's not a scam. We want you to be Suffolk dialect coach, Netflix film The Dig. And in 10 minutes' time, you're going to receive a phone call from Ray Fiennes. Cheerio, put the phone down. Well, I'm still hanging on to the phone. I thought, what's going on here? Well, sure enough, 10 minutes later, Ray Fiennes rang me up. And within another 10 minutes, we had agreed that I would be his Suffolk dialect coach for 2.5 months before filming started. I would then do 2 workshops for all the other actors in London, 2 workshops that had Suffolk parts. And I'd then be there for the first 3 filming sessions to make sure they'd got it right. Well, it just so happens in those 3 filming sessions, right, they kept on tweaking the script. So we kept on sitting down and going through it again. So Ray Fiennes and all the other actors went up to the producer and say, listen, if you keep on changing this here script, we need him here all the time. And the producer agreed, came up to me and said, "Charlie, your contract has just been extended by 3 months." I said, "When from?" He went, "Now." I was expecting to go home that evening, but another 3 months. And that's how I became involved with the dig for a total of 6 months. But going back to that original phone call, within a fortnight, I met Ray Fiennes at Colchester Railway Station. And we were going to drive to the Key Theatre in Sudbury, where we had a room set out for us so we could do 4 8-hour shifts going through his script. 4 8-hour shifts going through his script, right? But before we got out of Colchester Railway car park, I say to him, you know I've got my work cut out, don't you? He said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Teaching you a Suffolk accent." He said, "Why's that?" I said, "Because all you actors, and I mean all you actors, whether it be the big screen, whether it be television, whether it be radio, when you try and do a Suffolk accent, you all end up west of Swindon with a touch of Long John Silver. Lovejoy, heart of Suffolk, going to a pub in Lavenham. Oh, I've had a hard day's work today. I fancy a bite, a bit of oh. The Detectorists, that was on the go. The Detectorists, filmed in Framlingham, supposed to be South Suffolk and North Essex. It's over here. It's over here. And I looked at him and say, "We are not West Country pirates." And then I show him what was in the East Anglian Daily Times, a complete page about these Mummerset accents. And also there was a letter there from the ex-editor going on about how these West Country accents, Mummerset. And I show him and he said, "No West Country pirates on my shift." And that's before we got out of Colchester car park. Going back to that original phone call again, within 2 days I had received the script. And that was my first job, was to go through that script for 2 days. And when I say 2 days, I was up at 5 o'clock in the morning, I was sitting in my little office at 6 o'clock, and I went through at 10 o'clock at night. Right? 2 days, suffocating the script. That's going to be better than some of the things you're going to see in the Christmas crackers later on, aren't you? Right? So I'd left the script in standard English. Underneath, I'd rewritten it phonetically as a Suffolk person would say it. So then they knew what I was trying to put down. And I also put in some hieroglyphics. But I then realised I was going to teach him an accent rather than a dialect. Because if I'd have taught him a Suffolk dialect, bearing in mind this film was going to go global, it was going to go round the world. That's what global means. And I thought, it's going to be shown in America, Australia, and if I teach him how to do a Suffolk dialect, then only people in Suffolk, Norfolk are going to understand it. So I'm going to teach him an accent, and I've had some funny looks already. Right, the difference between an accent and a dialect. A dialect is the language of that particular area, and it's split up mainly into counties or cities. So you've got a Suffolk dialect, you've got a Norfolk dialect, you've got East London dialect, you've got a Geordie dialect. So you've got and it is the language of that particular area. And it's made up of 3 components. So you've got the vocabulary of that area. So there, instead of that being a scab, in Suffolk, that's a roof. And if something's not quite straight, that's slightly on the her, right? And if someone's a little bit big-headed, they're botty, right? And there's a heavy dag in the morning when there's a heavy dew. So there's just a couple of 3 examples of the vocabulary. Then you've got the grammar, right? Now my mother, because I come from a mixed race family, my mother is West Suffolk and my dad was East Suffolk. And they both but my mum runned for West Suffolk and my dad runned for East Suffolk. Never ran for a bus, they runned for the bus. And I show them how to do it instead of showed. And do you as an instruction, never a question. My mother would never say, "Do you want a cup of tea?" That's, "Would you like a cup of tea?" But do you go careful on your bike? Do you look after your pocket money till next week? So do you as an instruction. So there's an example of the grammar of the area. Then you've got the way we say it, which is the accent. Put those 3 together and you're going to end up with a dialect. So I was going to teach him an accent. Not my accent, a modern Suffolk accent, but going back to my granddad's accent, 1939. But where I could, I was going to put in a few little Suffolk phrases and words, if in context it would have been understood in Australia, America, or wherever. So for example, lucky for me, Someone had just shown Mrs. Pretty how to do something, so I was able to say, I shoe Mrs. Pretty. Now, bearing in mind I'm teaching him my grandfather's accent, now I never ever heard my grandfather say thank you. I never ever heard my great aunts and uncles say thank you. That was always, thank you kindly, thank you kindly, always thank you kindly. And through that film, you'll hear them all the time saying, thank you kindly. Come along, you lot. Cheerio, everybody. Not in Suffolk. Come along together. Cheerio together. So that gets slipped in where I could. And when something was going wrong in the dig, not the filming of it, but in the dig, the scripts say, oh dear. Well, that got changed to could blast. Or blast, right? And when Robert went past on a bike, the scripts say, blimey, that's Robert. Well, that's very East London, so that got changed to cut to hell, that's Robert. And that came over in the film as well. Mrs. Pretty was down in the dig when it was unsafe. And Basil Brown comes round and the scripts say, you mustn't be down there, Mrs. Pretty. Well, this is where I could slip in a little bit of Suffolk grammar. You mayn't be down there, Mrs. Pretty. And everybody would have understood that wherever they would have been. You mayn't be down there, Mrs. Pretty. See these mounds? Not like the Romans? Not in Suffolk. See these here mounds? Not like them there Romans. This here auditorium, this here theatre, that there screen, this here flip chart. So that there, this here got slipped in wherever we could. He said, she said, and I said. Not in Suffolk. He say to me, then I say to her, and she say to me, and as he say, I say, and she say. So all through the film you can hear he say, she say, and I say. And do you look after that Viking maiden? And come you here instead of come here. But what we couldn't do was put phrases in like these strakes are slightly on her, because only people in Suffolk and Norfolk would understood her. And there's a heavy dag this morning, and there was, because we were filming in September, and nearly every morning there was a heavy dag, but that had to stay, there's a heavy dew this morning. But I also used some hieroglyphics. And here are some of the hieroglyphics I used. A capital R with a line going through it. And in the legend it said, this is not a West Country R. So when I'd writ together, that was T apostrophe G-E-T-H-A. We don't pronounce the R. It's called rotic R. Not the erotic R, that's R. So it's together. And then we say farm, it's F-A-A-A-M. Farm. And above that, I put an R with a line through it. Right? In the West Country, it's farm. They pronounce it. And it's together. We don't. The only time we pronounce an R at the end of a word is when the next one begins with a vowel. And then we take the R off that word and we put it on that one. So it's later, Ron. And after, Rule. And bugger, Roth. Where I put an inverted V over the word, that's the double syllable. The double syllable, that's Basil Brewen, that's Ipswich Town, I'm standing here, indeed. So they are the double syllables, and I explain later on why we do that. Where I put an A, capital A in the word, right, because in Suffolk we don't say make and cake and John Jacobs, it's make and cake and John Jacobs. So make was lowercase m, capital A, lowercase k, lowercase e. And in the legend it was, this is the Australian A. And I eventually had the actors in front of me and I said, if you start sounding a bit Australian, then Suffolk people will know that you're trying to do a Suffolk accent. And they all looked at me, I said, I'll explain that one later on to you. So that was the Australian A. Where I put a long line over the word, that's the long vowel. Now up north they say past, down south they say past. But we are the Easterlings. We are East Anglia. The East Angles, that's Norfolk and Suffolk, right? With a little bit of Cambridgeshire. They are the East Angles. You can go Aberystwyth and you can go across and you've got the Midlands and then you come to East Anglia, right? And we are the link between the north and the south. So up there it's past, Down south it's past. We say past. P-A-A-A-S-T. And in the film clip we're going to see shortly, right, you're going to hear him say past. Not past or pass, that's past. And it's last, not last or last. Where I put a dot over the word, that was the short vowel. I haven't been here, I've been here. I haven't seen it, I've seen it. So that was the short vowel, okay? Where I put 3 dots in between 2 words, this is a Suffolk pause. We are famous for it. It is inherent in the way we tell our stories. It goes back to Beowulf times. It really does. So there'd be a crowd round, right, during the daytime, because there was no lighting at night time. And I would then start telling a story or reciting Beowulf. And I'd go on for a little while and a pause. And then another little pause and then go on for a little while. And all the time you're holding on to the audience. We've done that and we still do today. And I had the actors there in front of me talking about this pause because it is important. It really is. I said every Sunday afternoon, that was either around our house, Grandma and Granddad's house, or Great Aunt and Uncle's house. And we went in the front room. That was the only time we went in the front room was on a Sunday, unless there was a funeral. And then someone would play the piano, someone sing a song, someone play the violin, someone on the squeeze box. I said, and then Granddad would stand up and tell a story. I remember I came out of school one day. I went running down the lane, turned the corner, and there he was, standing there. And Ray Fiennes went, yeah, who? I said, I've got you. It was either the village bully or the village copper, but you are hanging on, I said, to who's there. I said, now this is the way we tell our stories. You know, it's inherent in the way we've done it since a year dot. And in the scene that you're going to see, Mrs. Pretty has turned around and say that she had been involved in an archaeological dig when she was so high, because with her father, because there had been a Cistercian convent on their land. And in the script, it say, Basil Brown goes, that speaks done at the past. I said, oh, no. I said, that's not how my granddad would say it. That's the way I could tell him he wasn't acting right. So I just say, my granddad wouldn't say it like that. He said, how would your granddad say it? That speaks, doesn't it? The past. I said, now in that pause, Mrs. Pretty is now asking the question, what speaks? Everybody watching that film is asking what speaks. And then you come out with the answer, the past. I said, and it's a big statement. When you put it together, people will be thinking about it by which time on your next bit, and you might even miss that one or that one. But he took on board on that. And the other thing he said in this clip was that the young girls used to lie on the mounds in the hope of becoming pregnant. He said, well, I've heard plenty of legends. Is that why you want to do the dig, Mrs. Pretty, tales of buried treasure? I said, well, hold on a minute. You just cracked a funny there. Is that why you want to do the dig, Mrs. Pretty? Pause, get her thinking one thing, and then come back and say, tales of buried treasure, which is completely different to what she thought you meant. So in this, you're going to see the long vowel, and you're going to see the long pause.
What are they? Would you hazard a guess?
Burial mounds, I expect. We're standing in someone's graveyard, I reckon. Viking? Oh, maybe older.
Apparently local girls used to lie down on them in the hope of falling pregnant.
I've heard plenty of legends. Is that why you want to dig, Mrs. Pretty? Tales of buried treasure?
My interest in archaeology began like yours when I was scarcely old enough to hold a trowel. My childhood home was built on a Cistercian convent. I helped my father excavate the apse.
That speaks, doesn't it? The past.
Now, in the next clip you're going to see him with a different accent to that, because he was talking to the lady of the manor. Now, there's some of you sitting here, you know, I can tell from your age group that your mums and dads or grandmas and granddads used to talk about when they met Lord and Lady of the manor, and so therefore they would try and put on a bit of a posher accent, but when they got back home, back in their normal accent with their family. So this one, you're going to see him talking to his wife and you're going to see a stronger accent. I found that ship. I may not be a fellow at Cambridge, but I worked out what was down there. Jacobs and Spooner too, but nobody will remember that.
I found that ship. I may not be a fellow at Cambridge, but I worked out what was down there. Jacobs and Spooner too, and nobody will remember that.
You don't know that. And if you're not around to see it to the end, there's even less chance. You always told me your work ain't about the past or even the present. That's for the future. So that the next generations can know where they came from. The line that joins them to their forebears. Isn't that what you always say?
Something like that.
Why else would the lot of you be playing around in the dirt while the rest of the country prepares for war? Because that means something, doesn't it? Something that'll last longer than whatever damn war we're heading into.
So you heard the difference there between talking to Mrs. Pretty and talking to his wife. Some of the other... Now, I made some new words up when it come to grammar. That's half a T, so that's half a glottal stop. Now, in standard English, it's Mrs. Pretty. East London, that's Mrs. Pretty. They dropped the T altogether. But Suffolk, we just hit it, so it's Mrs. Pretty. So therefore, we only just hit it, but not as hard as if it was standard English. So I called that a half glottal stop. But where it was a full glottal stop, and we didn't pronounce the T at all, I put an X, like Robert. So they found a rivet, gave it to Robert, and then gave it to Mrs. Pretty. So therefore, you'd have an X, and a half a T over the top of the words. All right? We're now getting on to the sounds that some people laugh at. I saw ooh. Now then, we don't say Tuesday, that's Tuesday. It's not the 10 o'clock news, that's the 10 o'clock news. And that's a newspaper. And that's Tudors and Stuarts. And if something's rather large, that's huge. There's lots of nodding heads out there, lots of nodding heads. And on top of that, I would then put two O's, and then in the legend, this is the Suffolk oo sound. And I explained why. Up until the Normans arrived, we were a mixture of Anglo-Saxons, Jutes and Frisians and Vikings. And we were a complete mixture. And if you look at some of their alphabets today, if you look up the letter U, say in German, it is oo. Right? Then when you had all the Flemish weavers coming over and all the Dutch engineers, right, they brought in another Germanic tongue and you've got the oo sound. And so that's why we've got the oo sound in the Suffolk dialect. The verbs, I put apostrophe N. So it's running, walking and talking. They either wanted to go West Country or East London. They either wanted to go running, walking, talking, or they wanted to go running, walking, talking. I said, no, that's run with N on the end. So it's run, walking, talking. So off they went again, running, walking, talking, or running, walking, talking. I went, no. And what they did, they changed that apostrophe to a U, and that's how they nailed running, walking and talking. So that's how I got that one across. Now we're coming on to the more difficult sounds. Oi. Oi. Might be simple to you, but it weren't to them. Right? Now, in one line, right, Ray Fiennes, or Basil Brown, Basil, had to say, I am. So I wrote that down phonetically, I am. I am. So he'd learned a little catchphrase for this. Helen of Troy, I. Helen of Troy, my. Helen of Troy, nine. So I said, right, come on then, I am. Helen of Troy, I am. I said, no, that's I am. He went, Helen of Troy, I am. I'm not getting them. I said, no, you're not. I said, what part did you play in Bond? He went, M. I went, right, I am. And that's how he nailed it. That's how he nailed it. Where it was a bit sing-songy, I then put a little musical note. What'd you do that for? Going down the road home. Or where it got a little bit, there was a little musical note so they could get a little bit sing-songy. Now the two most difficult sounds of the lot. O and I. How do you write that phonetically? How do you write cow phonetically? If you put C-O-W, it's cow. If you put C-E-O-W, it's keo. So how do you write cow phonetically? You can't, right? And this is when I found out I was doing something completely different to any other voice coach they'd ever come across before. They had never, ever met anybody like me because I did something completely different to any other voice coach. I did it with mirrors. And here is the reason why, right? Now, Suffolk, we resonate at the front of the mouth. One of the very, very few accents that resonate at the front of the mouth. So much so that we are one, along with Norfolk, because I know I've got a Norfolk lady sitting in the audience, so I'm going to include her as well. But Suffolk and Norfolk, we resonate at the front of the mouth, and we are two of the very, very few accents that pronounce the letter H. That's over here. That's Charlie Haylock. That's Halesworth. That's Haverhill. I'm standing here. We pronounce the letter H because we resonate at the front of the mouth. Now, we don't open the mouth very wide. So much so that Suffolk is the hardest dialect, along with Glaswegian, for lip readers to lip read, because we don't open the mouth very wide. So it's very important to get this right. So to start off with the O sound, it's eh. Don't open the mouth very wide, it's eh. And then we push the lips out. O. O. And with E, that's not a cheese sandwich, that's cheese. Cheese. Ruth, next time well, there's not going to be a next time. What we should have done is brought a camera along, because I've got a whole load of people out there looking at me going, right. So this is what we did, O and E, right? Now, if you can imagine, we're now out on location. I've got the script with me, and standing next to me is the script supervisor. After every line that the Suffolk actor said, I gave a mark out of 10. Only 9s and 10s were going to be acceptable. 8 and below were binned. Sometimes we were doing 35 or more takes. So therefore, after every line, not after every shoot, but every line in every shoot, I'm then putting a mark against and giving it to the script supervisor. So as I'm standing there, you've got to remember there's about 80 odd people behind me. You've got the people that do the lights. You've got the people that do the sound. You've got the people that do the makeup, people that do the hair, people that do the dress. The catering staff, the admin staff is about 80 odd. Now, the first person that Ray Fiennes looked at when he came off a take was me to see if he got the accent right. So he'd either get a thumbs up or a thumbs down. If it's thumbs down, invariably it was, right? We go over, we talk about it. Then, because we'd done it so often, we started doing hand signals. So he'd look at me. If I went like that, it had to be a bit more sing-songy. If I went like that, the vowels had to be longer. If I went like that, the vowels had to be shorter. Now, he was getting this O and E sound wrong. Now, bearing in mind, I'm calling him Basil. I called him Basil for 6 months. I didn't call him Rafe until film and finished. There he is trying to be Basil Brown, so I called him Basil. And it just shows you, in this particular scene, that wasn't Carey Mulligan playing Mrs. Pretty and Ray Fiennes playing Basil Brown. They had become those two people by what she said at the finish. So he's come up, he's looked at me, and he can't get this sound right. So I've looked at him, I've gone. Straight away, he's gone, oh. He comes up next time, he knows he ain't got it right. Before I could do anything, he's gone, oh. And of course, I got, oh, back. Well, apparently 80 odd people started talking about us two. But bearing in mind, they had made the decision that they were not going to go on until they got it right. They told me that beforehand. They were going to stay. And sometimes, on one occasion, we started at 6 o'clock in the morning. We were on set at 6 o'clock in the morning. We started filming at 8 and we finished at 8 at night. and we achieved 6 lines. I know. So therefore, so I had these two by my side there, right? And he's come up and, it must have been about 35 takes, and we're becoming, and eventually he was nearly there, and I'm holding up 9.7. He came up next, and he's nearly nailed it, and I'm holding up 9.9. What did I hear? You're improving, Brown. Not that was better, Rafe. You heard Mrs. Pretty talking to Basil Brown saying, you're improving, Brown. So it just shows you how much they were in part. Poor old Mr. Spooner had every single one of those sounds in one line, and he kept on laughing. I said, you can't laugh when you hit a funny in Suffolk. Suffolk people, it is rude to laugh at your own joke. We've been told that ever since you were so high. It's big-headed to laugh at your own joke. It's arrogant to laugh at your own joke. You've got to keep a deadpan face. Now, other people laugh at it, but you can't. You've got to keep a deadpan face. And there he was trying not to laugh, but eventually he nailed it, right? And his line was, if you ask me, a man should leave Mrs. Pretty's mounds well alone. Why do we have the double syllable? Now, I explained to them that Suffolk and Norfolk is that lump on the side of East England that's been left alone for centuries, centuries and centuries, and even longer than that. So much so that a lot of our pronunciations go back to Old English and Middle English. It wasn't until the 1950s, 60s and 70s when they then started building new towns and new estates like Great Cornard, like Haverhill, and mostly from South Essex and East London coming out. But up until then, we'd been left alone. So much so, we go back to those old pronunciations. If I write up D-E-O-R, that's Old English. How would you pronounce that, please? Dior. Dior. It's red with antlers. That's why Suffolk people say, do ya? Do ya? We're going do ya. R-U-M with an macron, an accent over the U, that makes it a long oo sound. So how would you pronounce that? Bearing in mind you're going to pronounce the last letter as hard as the first letter in Old English, that becomes ruin, ruum, like a bedroom, right? So you can see where and why we get the double syllables. Also, bear in mind the Wuffingers, who are rulers of the Angles, they started life in Sweden, an offshoot of the Swedish royal family, because if you look at the burial ship in Uppsala, it's exactly the same as one at Sutton Hoo. In design, also the armoury they found, also the weaponry they found, and all the little patterns and squirrels, and exactly the same, right? And lots of Suffolk dialect words come from Old Swedish, they really do, right? So therefore, if you ask a Swede today to pronounce Gothenburg, it's Göteborg. Göteborg, and it was Sven-Göran Eriksson, not Sven-Goran Eriksson. And at the top of Jutland, it's S-K-A-G-E-N as Skane. So therefore, we've had plenty of this today. This is Old English, but the G is pronounced as a Y. And the last letter is pronounced just as hard as the first letter. So it becomes Rayin. Rayin. Okay, we spell it R-A-I-N today, Rayin. But this is why Suffolk people pronounce rain as rayin, right? And then you have got W-A-G-N, right? This went two ways. It eventually became wagon, but also if you pronounce the G as a Y, you get wayin, as in constables, hay wayin, hay wagon. So I'm explaining to them why we have the double syllables. If they understand why we have the double syllables, then we have got more chance of succeeding getting the accent right. Lucky for me, I explained to them the importance of Sutton Hoo, because there's a lovely programme on BBC Two, Raiders of the Lost Past, Dr. Ramirez, and she came out talking about the 3 most iconic archaeological digs worldwide. And Sutton Hoo is one of those 3. Because as she said, before the Angles arrived, we were British. Britain speaking a tongue very similar to Welsh and Cornish today. Romans been and gone, leaving behind British people. The Angles arrived, right? It's where we get the name from, Angleland, Angleterre, les Anglais, he Angles, not English, les Anglais, right? And Dr. Ramirez said Sutton Hoo, what they found there, opened up the Dark Ages, and it showed that they went beyond to Asia, they went to North Africa, so this opened up. She said, this is the first page of English history, not British history, the first page of English history, the first page of the English people, and the first page of the English language. I got them to see that on iPlay, the director, the producer, and all the actors. They then said, right, this film now is more important than what we thought before, and so therefore the accent's got to be right. Music to my ears, right? It's got to be right. And we're going to have a special screening in Suffolk, because if Suffolk give the thumbs up, then it's going to be a hit. If Suffolk give a thumbs down, we're going to be struggling. So they were going to have a special screening in the Key Theatre in Sudbury and one at Woodbridge, because that's opposite Sutton Hoo on the rear. Then the pandemic hit and both those special screenings were put to one side. I know, but they had made that decision. Ray Fiennes also made another decision about the dialect. He decided that he was going to stay in a Suffolk dialect all the time from the second time I met him. Now, it made my job a lot harder. Not only am I keeping him to the script, so when we go into a cafe and he wants a bacon sandwich, can I have a bacon sandwich, please, dear? No, that's can I have a bacon sandwich, please, do you? So all the time, I'm hitting him all the time, non-stop, all the time I'm beside him, on and off the screen. He then decides that he wants to go out and try his Suffolk accent in the community. So there we are in Sudbury, and we're going to go into a couple of cafes for lunch. We sit down, this lady comes up, gives him the menu, walking back to the kitchen, then she realises who it is. She goes in the kitchen, bring them all out. Now, I could see this, but he couldn't because he had his back to her. She came, have you decided? Yes, please, dear. Can I have a bacon sandwich, please, dear? Certainly, my dear boy. And what are you doing here? I'm trying to speak like you do, dear. You ain't doing a bad job. Would you sign my menu for me, please? And he signed the menu. We then go to the Blacksall Ship on a Monday afternoon. Well, those that don't know, the Blacksall Ship is a pub called The Ship in a village called Blacksall. Not too far from Snape, right? But every Monday afternoon, that's a busker's afternoon, and people play their songs, play their instruments, tell their stories, go up to the bar, buy drinks, buy food and what have you. Well, he went along there twice. 2 Mondays running. So he sat down there and somebody said to him, can you sing a song? He said, I can hold a tune. Come on, boy, stand up and sing. So he stood up and he sang and he joined in conversations and everything else. Went there twice, right? He then decides that he wants to go out on a pub crawl. Well, when I say a pub crawl, we went to 4 pubs. He had half a pint of Adnams in each one. Now, if he calls that a pub crawl, he wasn't brought up in Suffolk. I know he was born in Ipswich, and I know that he lived in Wangford up until he was about 4 and a half. Then the family moved to the West Country. That's where he went to school, both for infant and then also secondary. Then went over to Ireland, stayed there for a long while. So he really didn't know what a Suffolk accent sounded like. I can assure you of that. He really, really didn't. But he now wants to go out on this here pub crawl. So I say to him, right, we're not going to go into town pubs because there'll be too many accents from other places. We'll go into a village pub. Won't go in the saloon bar, we'll go in the tap room or the public bar. Now, when we open up the door, everybody in there will look round to see who's come in. So say, hello, Bill, hello, Jason, and there's 2 strangers stood there. They're looking at us and we're looking at them, and there's going to be a deathly hush. We look at them and we say, evening. They'll say good evening back, because it's in the countryside, not like you lot. So they'll say good evening back. We'll go to the bar, we'll buy some drinks, we can turn round, we'll get in a conversation, and then you can hear the rhythm of Suffolk, hear where the pauses are and everything else like that. So we went in the first 2 pubs. Sure, that happened when we opened up the door, evening, and got to the bar. But unfortunately, only half the people in there were for Suffolk, and the other half for other places, mainly South Essex and East London. We then go into the 3rd pub. And as we're going up to the third pub, he puts his hand on my forearm and he say, Charlie, I'll go in first this time. I went, all right. So we opened up the door. There was a lady by the door, a lady in the corner, a bloke by the bar, and a barman. That was all. I thought, this won't work. And they all looked at him. He went, evening. They all came back, evening. I thought, yes, it will. Same thing happened to me. Now, this is my 205th talk about the dig, right? My 200th was for the Sutton Hoo Society, but this, right? And I have not changed this story one iota, and this is 100% accurate, I can assure you. No, I haven't changed it at all, right? So, we go up to the bar, and the barman say, hello, my dear boy, what would you care for? He said, I'll have a half of Adnams, please. What would you like, Charlie? I said, I'll have a half of lemonade, please. And the other fella at the bar went, I can see who's driving tonight, then. Ray Fiennes turned around and went, here. Yeah, he's got it. I know he's got it. So we get the drinks, we turn around. So I've got my back to the bar, then Ray Fiennes, then the other fella, the barman behind us, and these two ladies. One by the door, one in the corner. Now, those two ladies, me, the other fella, and the barman, all in the same age group, we're talking 75 plus. There's Ray Fiennes, there he is, 15 years or so younger. So I say to them, does Fred still come in here? Now, Fred used to go in that pub every night of the week. Every night, and that was 8 pints a night. Except on a Friday night, a Saturday night, and a Sunday lunchtime, when he got down to some serious drinking, and then that was 10 or 12 pints. Does Fred still come in here? Oh, no. No. Fred can't come in like he used to. 3 pints, 3 times a week as his limit. Can't come in no more than 3. And then the lady in the corner, 3 pints is his limit as well. Can't drink no more than 3. 3 pints is his limit. Then all of a sudden, the lady opposite turn around and say, trouble down below. Pardon? Trouble down below. Gets about 3 pints inside him. Can't drink no more than that. Then after about 5 and 20 minutes, he's got to go to the toilet. Then he stands there for another 20 minutes because nothing happens. And then it either drips or sprays everywhere. Now, we can't do that because they're being serious. Now, I can keep a deadpan face because I'm Suffolk and he can because he's a good actor. Then the lady opposite turned around and say, because he's got big hands, you know, got the biggest hands I've ever seen in my life. They're like buckets, they are, great old hands. And Rafe goes, how do you know he's got big hands like that? Never you bloody mind how I knows he's, eh? Then the lady opposite turned around and say, 6 fingers. Pardon? Got 6 fingers. Then the bloke alongside tells us how he had an operation, had his little fingers cut off. Then the lady opposite turned around and say, because he's got 6 toes, you know, as well. And Rafe Fiennes looked to me as, where have you brought me to, looks. Then we hear about the operation, how we had his little toes cut off, and how we kept a straight face. Next, I'll never ever know. I was pushed to the limit, and I'm Suffolk. He was pushed to the limit because the lady opposite turned around and say, because you know he's got 3 testicles. Pardon? He's got 3 testicles, and Ray Fiennes went, how do you know he's got 3 testicles? Because we went to school with him. We've known he's had 3 testicles ever since we were so high. We'd say, come on, Fred boy, drop your shorts, let's have a look. He'd drop his shorts, we'd get down, have a little look, put our hand in, have a little feel. So we know he's got 3 testicles, and that's why we nicknamed him Tripod. Then the bloke opposite turned around and said, because he's had a hernia, you know. Ray Fiennes says, the bloody wonder with 3. And then we hear about the hernia operation. Anyway, it's time to drink up. You say, right, we've got to go now. Give our regards to Fred. And as he's going out the door, he say, cheerio together. And I went, cheerio, dear boy. And we got out the pub. And as soon as he put his hand on my forearm. He went, Charlie, are you taking me into deep as Suffolk? I went, yeah. He said, I don't think I want to go any further, is he? Yeah. Well, later on, we're out on location. And he's riding his bike, he's going up and down, saying a few words. I'm then putting script supervisor with all the marks going against it. Eventually, after about 20 takes, 25, the director says, cut, finish. Right. Now then, if you've ever watched Miss Marple or Poirot or Murder, She Wrote, and there is, in a film situation, is always the director that gets murdered. I now know why. Oh, when they say this, you jump, you do the, oh, it's like going back to the 1920s, 30s. And he said, cut, finish. I then turned round and said, you don't ride a bike like that in Suffolk, Basil? And then everybody looked, I know. It was like the janitor telling the company chairman he's got it wrong. And the atmosphere that was building up, because they were all glaring at me because I'd done something you don't do. Quickly, Basil said, why not then, Charlie? I said, because I'm calling him back. I said, Basil. I said, when you ride a bike in Suffolk, not like you did, you got to sit there slightly on the left, slightly on the right, or even side saddle, but not square on like you do, because if you've got 3 testicles, everybody laughed except the director. No. Right, we've come up to a timely break because in the second half, I'm going to tell you how that man became Basil Brown. How did that man become Basil Brown? Well, when I met him, he had read books about Basil Brown. He had read books about Mrs. Pretty. He had read books about Sutton Hoo in general, because he wanted to know not only about Basil Brown, but how in 1939 he would have fitted in to the social structure of the Lord and Lady of the Manor, and then you had the estates and what have you. He wanted to know how he would have fitted into that. Lucky for us, it was the 80th anniversary of the dig. The 80th anniversary. 1939, and we were filming in 2019. And because of that, the East Anglian Daily Times, along with the Eastern Daily Press, came out with their weekend editions, weekend after weekend, special supplements about Sutton Hoo, The Gentleman's Daughter, Mrs. Pretty, Basil Brown, Little Leaflets. He read all those. And at the end, he turned around and said, right, I learnt more from what was in the East Anglian because I now know it was typically Suffolk. Told me a lot in not too many words. So I knew exactly what he meant by that. He dressed like Basil Brown from the second time I met him. So for 2.5 months, he went to the wardrobe, right, at the stead, and he took out all Basil Brown's gear, right, and wore it every day until we started filming. Yes, you look like that. Why? I'll tell you why, because it's all tweedy stuff and itchy. So therefore, he was putting on these clothes every day of the week. So therefore, when he got to filming, he was putting on his everyday clothes and not a stage prop. Even when he went for an interview in New York for another job with a Suffolk accent, dressed like that, he got the job. Yes. He cycled everywhere like Basil Brown did. So the second time I met him, and not a racing bike, we're talking about the sit-up and bed bike that you saw in the film. So he collared that as well. So the second time I met him, he got out of Sudbury railway station and then cycled all the way to Sudbury. Stayed there for a couple of 3 days at the mill, and then we did our 8-hour shifts. And then he cycled from Sudbury to Woodbridge, where he did some more research. He then cycled to Sutton Hoo, where he did even more research and stayed for a while. But he also cycled from Sutton Hoo to Rickinghall and back. We're talking of something like a 70-odd mile round trip. And why? Because Basil Brown did that. And he wanted to do the same trip as what Basil Brown did. And he looked at the map and he went along what he thought might have been the lanes that Basil Brown would have gone along. So he would try and see the same sort of countryside that Basil Brown would have done. And whilst he was at Rickinghall, he then spoke to people in Rickinghall who knew Basil Brown. Now, at my 50th talk I gave, right, it finished and everybody clearing up. And then this lady came up to me and in a very proud way, but just wanted to tell me, not for everybody to know, she said, I knew Basil Brown. I was a teenager at the end of the Second World War and I worked in Basil Brown's garden and May Brown's garden with my friend. I have watched that film so many times, I've cried. Not only did he talk like Basil Brown, not only did he walk like Basil Brown, but he talked to the young Robert in that film just the same way as Basil talked to the young people in the village. Now, his name didn't go up in lights like it should have done, she said, But in the village, we knew he had found something new. We knew that. Everybody in the village knew that. And when the kids were helping their dad or mum in the garden and dug up something, they'd go banging on his door. Is this worth anything, Mr. Brown? Not one child was turned away. Oh, that looks interesting. May, put the kettle on for a cup of tea. Come you here. And used to, and whatever they took to him, they made him feel important. So, oh no, this, and told him, and made him feel really important. She said, every child walked away from that house feeling 10 feet tall. I said, I've watched that film so many times, and the way he talks to Robert is the same way. And I rang up Ray Fiennes, I told him, and I know up the other end, he went, oh, oh. Now, that is better than anything you can read in The Observer, better than anything you can read in the Sunday Times or whatever. That came from the heart, right? And as it happens later on, I'll show you, he's had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds from the general public. And I'll give you some examples at the end. He talked to people in Rickinghall to find out any mannerisms about Basil Brown and everything else like that. He visited the British Museum, not just to see the treasure, but to read Basil Brown's notebooks, so he could get in some idea of how Basil Brown was thinking. So when they found a river, whether they just scraped at it, whether they brushed it, how it was all written down, how he drew things out. And he also did the same when he was at Sutton Hoo, because there's some books there that obviously Basil Brown has made. Now, a lot of people don't realise that Basil Brown was famous for astronomy long before archaeology. He left school when he was 12. He taught himself Arabic, he taught himself ancient Greek, and he taught himself Latin. And then he read books on astronomy in all those 3 languages and translated it into an easy-read English book. Ray Fiennes read that book so he could get into Basil Brown's way of thinking. And just as well he did, because there we were out on location. There we were, looking through a telescope. Young Robert say, oh, that's so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. Ray Fiennes says, no, that's not. This is September. That's so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. They brought in some specialists from a local university. He was 100% right. He was thinking like Basil Brown. He went on an archaeological dig, not just for half an hour, on the Suffolk-Norfolk border, because I've met the lady who taught him. So he could then stay there for a while and learn how to behave in a dig, when to go at it fairly, when to brush gently, when to scrape it. When he then knew how to behave in a dig and not be told by otherwise a director who didn't know. And I can tell you, sometimes the director was telling Ray Fiennes to do things that you don't do in a dig. And he said, no, you don't do it that way. Director says, I'm the director, you do it my way. He said, no, we don't, because you don't do it that way. We do it this way and we got to get it right. And some ways a bit purple, I can tell you, right? Now, I shouldn't tell you this, but I will. If you've ever gone on my website and you've seen that lovely photograph of me and Ray Fiennes, the colour photograph, that was taken by Kerry Mulligan. I'm then on location. There's Kerry Mulligan playing Mrs. Pretty, and we're having a chat before we're going to go on to. And Ray Fiennes comes up and he say to me, Charlie, I want to tell you what I did last night. I said, do you? He said, no. He said, this is something special. He said, only you will understand. And I'd like to tell you privately. So we walked away down the lane. Kerry Mulligan straight away got her eye and took a photograph. And this is what he was telling me. He said, last night, he said, that was a full moon. And there was a halo around the moon and it was a clear sky, not a cloud in the sky, and all the stars were shining. I got my driver to take me to Sutton Hoo. And we got there and nobody on the gates or anything else like this. Was midnight. And I went through and I laid on the mound. Not to get pregnant, but I laid on the mound and I stared up at the moon and I saw the halo and I looked at the stars. I laid there for an hour, taking it all in, because that's what Basil Brown did in 1939, and I wanted to get the same sort of feeling as what Basil Brown did. This is the extent this man went to, I know. And when we finished filming, right, I could now call him Rafe, right? So there we are, finished filming, and his little group, so the people that did the hair, people did the makeup, people that did the dress, me, the runner, the driver, he took us out and we all had a meal. And at the end of it, he picked up a glass of red wine. This is to Basil Brown, the most iconic character I've ever played in the whole of my acting career. Left school when he was 12, went on a constant search for knowledge for the rest of his life. Basil Brown. And I said, you're 2 peas in a pod, Basil Brown. And we drank it. And he's actually come to one of these talks, right? And he was asked the question, who's the most iconic character you've ever? He said, Basil Brown. He said, Basil Brown, for the reasons that I've given. He said other people have been pretend people and the like, but he said, no, that was a real person and I could get my teeth stuck into it. So with the other actors, I had a workshop in London and it was a dance studio. So it was about from that wall to where the first row is. And there was mirrors all down one side. And I've got the chart here and I've got them sat out behind tables swang ways, right? So therefore, I'm going to teach them how the history of Suffolk dialect, same as I did with, so they understand why they're saying it. And Ray Fiennes turned up to these. And he got up, I didn't know this was going to happen, and he said to me, so then Charlie, the reason why he was selected to be my dialect coach is because I saw a video of him doing a dialect tour of the British Isles and further afield, showing how deaf people can lip read and tell you what accent you've had. Now, you actors, it's no good listening to a dialect and trying to copy it because it won't work. What you've got to do is look at the mouth movements. Now, Charlie, could you please do your dialect tour so these actors can then see what you mean by looking at the mouth movements and why we've got all those mirrors down the side? So he said, what we're going to do is get the mouth movements right first, and then the ear will fine tune it. He said, otherwise it won't work, especially with the Suffolk dialect. Because they all said it was the hardest one ever to learn because we resonate the front and push our lips in. So I said, right, this is about a bloke I know who had acute hearing up until the age of 18. Then there was an explosion in the workshop, ended up with burst eardrums and lived in a world of silence. He learned how to lip read, and if you have a dialect, you tell you where you come from. I said, now we're going to start off in Scotland, right? Glasgow and the hinterland. Teeth on top of one another, mouth drops down at the side, noise from behind the teeth. They also roll their R's, and to do that, your tongue must be very, very close to the roof of your mouth. But the tongue is in the wrong position to pronounce the double L in the middle of a word, and it ends up a W. So you drop it down at a side there, and it's William and brilliant. I mean, Alex Ferguson, when he talked about Manchester, he played brilliant. But if you just open that way, there is Edinburgh, and you can now pronounce the double L. You then go across the Northern Ireland, you put the top set in front of the bottom set, mouth drops down at the side, noise from behind the teeth, and they push the bottom lip out. Together, sure, sound an nine, put the top set in front of the bottom set and push the bottom lip out. Do that. It's a very lilting dialect, but it can be very aggressive. Ian Paisley would have read it at a shopping list and that been aggressive. 2 pairs of Brussels sprouts. You go to the Republic of Ireland and they all talk through a her sound. It's a constant her. All the time they're talking through a her sound. And in the Irish Gaelic, you don't put your tongue in between your teeth like we do with mother, brother and through. The tongue stays behind the teeth. So the hard TH ends up a D. So it's mother, father. But the soft TH, they pronounce both the T and the H. So healthy becomes healthy. And filthy becomes filthy. And 3 becomes tray. Not tree, like an ash tree, that's tree. I'm talking about tray, right? So you can hear the difference, right? So I did a tour of South West Ireland, West Cork, Kerry and Clare, and there they move around. Little short, sharp phrases, head goes up in the air, head goes down. I saw an advertisement in the paper. The police was coming round the corner, but all the time they're talking through a her sound. You go to Dublin and they talk slightly out the side of the mouth. Where north side or south side of they're talking slightly out the side of the mouth. Go across to Liverpool, teeth on top of one another, noise from the back of the throat, travels through the nose and the mouth goes to one side. And Mr. Jewell, who used to look after Ipswich Town, right, he's Liverpudlian, he wouldn't say full back, it's full back. Full back, sneasel, goes through the nose. And if he doesn't talk about the blue shirt of Ipswich, it's blue shirt. Right, and that's why you get dirty Gertie from number 30. You go to the Midlands, and the Midlands speak from the roof of the mouth and make a circle with the lips. So if you're Coventry, we're into Birmingham, Black Country, right, the noise comes through the roof of the mouth, make a circle with the lips. Now, here we'll fine-tune it. We watch how people speak first, you say. Go to Yorkshire, and Yorkshire talk with their jaw very stiff. So if you're watching Geoffrey Boycott, he's talking with jaw right stiff as that. You go to the northeast, the jaw stays still, noise from the back of the throat, and the head goes up slightly. So Ruth and I, we went to Northumbria for a holiday. Went to a place called Alnwick, where the castle is, where they filmed Harry Potter. Right, so you've got Newcastle, you've got Berwick, and you've got Alnwick. Well, this didn't happen in the castle in Alnwick. This happened in a cafe in Alnwick. I'm rather glad it did, because I now call this an anecdote. They're getting better. Right. So we went up to the counter and we ordered up a round of sandwiches each and a pot of tea for two. Sat down, we finished them off, and I say to Ruth, I'm going to go and pay the bill. So I walked up the counter, and the lady behind the counter say, "What would you like, pet?" I said, "I want to pay, please." She says, "Well, hey, what sort?" I said, "What do you mean, what sort?" She says, "Well, we got blackberry and apple pie and just tea and apple." So I said, "No, I don't want to pay, I want to pay." I said, "I don't want to pay, I want to pay." She said, "Aye, blackberry and apple or just tea and apple?" So I said, "No, I want to pay the bill." She said, "Oh, you want to pay?" So I said, "Why, I pet, I want to pay." She said, "Why didn't you see her?" I said, "I did." By which time Ruth was crying with laughter watching us do, right? And you then go to Lancashire and they curl their tongue and the noise comes from here, resonate there. So if you're a Bolton Blackburn or Burnley, you're curling your tongue and it's coming from here. You then go to South Wales, teeth on top of one another, big broad grin. Very easy, do a South assassin, teeth together, keep on smiling. You know, I've had a bloody awful day today and they keep on smiling. Even when we lost to England at rugby. Yes. You then go to the West Country. I said to these actors, I said, "Now, if you resonate down here, right, to get an R sound, you know from down here. So if you do an R and resonate, you don't pronounce the letter H down here. You can't, right?" I said, "Now, Cornish, I make a circle with the lips, so it's Cornish, but still resonate down here. Then if you come up and then you put your teeth together, you're now in Somerset. So you go from Cornish to Somerset, but still resonating on the Adam's apple. If you're just above the Adam's apple, you're now in Hampshire. And the best exponent of a Hampshire dialect for me was a bloke called John Arlott. And in the 1960s, this is what he said, because I'd bunked off school, went round the back, right, and there I am listening to the radio on the transistor, and John Arlott came out with this little phrase, "I laugh like hell, headmaster going round on his rounds with his cane up his sleeve, heard her. This cost me 2 whacks the cane." The New Zealand wicket keeper, legs astride, waiting for a tickle. I think I've got to explain what a tickle is. When you're batting, right, and the batsman bat and the ball just touches slightly the bat, that's a tickle. Not perhaps what you was thinking, ID. Right. Right. Now we're going to start resonating just there. And we're in the Vale of Oxford, Pam Ayres. And Ruth and I, we saw Pam Ayres at Clacton doing her one-woman show, and she had the cheek to tell Essex people that the Ugly Sisters came from Fordham in Essex. And she gave them a little limerick to go. Now, I can't get as high as her, but I can do the accent. So I'm going to resonate just there. The Ugly Sisters, they came from Fordham. Now, it's not down here. The Ugly Sisters came from Fordham, so that's too much of the Rottic R. If I go too far forward, then there's no Rottic R at all. So you must resonate there. The Ugly Sisters, they came from Fordham. They went for a walk due to boredom. And on the way back, they met a sex maniac. And he totally ignored them. We now come to the front of the mouth. Now, bearing in mind, I've got the actors out swangways, right? So I'm saying to them, I want you now to look at my mouth movements and see if you can tell the difference between Suffolk and Norfolk. Now, Rickinghall is just south of the Norfolk border. But when you go into Norfolk to South Lotham and North Lotham, right, you've still got a sing-songy Suffolk type accent. It's not until you go further north up the River Waveney, up to Beccles, Halesworth and Bungay, when you've got a River Waveney accent and you've got more of a Norfolk influence. Now, there's nothing wrong with the Norfolk dialect, but you're trying to do a Suffolk one. So you need to know the difference. So, bearing in mind I had them out, like I say, I turned so these lot could see it, right? So, right, I said, right, Suffolk, would you like a cup of tea, dear? That's over here. Would you like a cup of tea, dear? That's over here. Then, would you like a cup of tea, dear? That's over here. Would you like a cup of tea, dear? That's over here. I said to the actors, I said, did any of you see the difference? This actor said, I did. I said, what's the difference then? Well, people from Suffolk turn to the right when they talk. They worked out it was the mouth, pushed the lips out. Suffolk push the lips out and Norfolk don't. That's why we have the double syllables. Huya, duya, Rowan, town, whereas Norfolk don't. That's over here rather than that's over here, right? So now we come to London. Wherever you go in the world, the largest is the fastest. Paris is the fastest French dialect. Oslo is the fastest Norwegian. New York is the fastest American. Ipswich is the fastest Suffolk dialect. Norwich is the fastest Norfolk dialect. And no matter where you go in the world, the largest is the fastest. And Suffolk is no exception. And East London is no exception. And East London is the fastest English-speaking dialect anywhere where English is spoken. Not only that, they open their mouth wider than any other English-speaking dialect. It is fair to say, because they talk so fast and open their mouth so wide, they don't have time to shut up. To make a t sound, you've actually got to have your teeth together. They can't do those. That's but I better leave it out. You're having a bird bath, aren't you? They also talk so fast, they don't have time to put their tongue in between their teeth like we do with mother, brother and through. It ends up mother, brother, through. They also can't pronounce the L on the end of a word because the tongue can't hit the roof of the mouth to make the L sound, so it ends up a W. So it's tell, del, little. I said, I'm now going to put two accents together. There was a mass migration from Suffolk to Australia in the 1820s, 30s, 40s and 50s. There were adverts for farmers, farm labourers, dairymaids, milkmaids, shepherds, sheep, the lot. And Suffolk farming folk, in their tens of thousands and even more, went out to Australia, right, including Charles Bradman, the grandfather of Sir Donald Bradman from Withersfield, not Wethersfield, Withersfield, just outside Haverhill. Now, they were mainly blokes. So therefore, they wanted women to help populate the colonies. So they put adverts in the Suffolk Chronicle for girls aged between 15 and 30, right? Because the age of consent then was 12. So they advertised for 15 to 30-year-olds, and if accepted by the committee, then free passage to Australia. So out they went. So Suffolk was the basis of the Australian dialect. Now the prison ships. The East London prison ships and the Suffolk prison ships are more than the rest of the country put together. So Suffolk is the basis of the Australia with a little bit of East London coming in. Now, I don't open my mouth wide enough to say day. It ends up D, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Now, all I'm going to do is try and say Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday with my mouth getting wider and wider and wider and see what happens. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and all I'm doing is a Suffolk accent, mouth wide open. So that's why you actors, if you start sounding Australian, then Suffolk people will know that you're trying to do a Suffolk accent, all right? Because when Suffolk people go abroad to places like North Lincolnshire, it's the question I used to get asked on BBC Radio Suffolk more than most, about why we're taking it. Even Suffolk people who've gone to Australia, Western Australia, Perth, have been asked by Australians, excuse me, mate, what part of Tasmania do you come from? So therefore, that then became essential for them to look at the mouth movements. By the time we finished going through the history of the Suffolk dialect, with the Viking influence and everything else, all the actors got their smartphones out and I read out their lines and they copied my mouth. So when they got home, not only could they hear me do their lines, they could also watch my mouth movements and copy them on the mirror. So that's how it all went through, I know. And some of them, they went to great lengths. The workshop wasn't good enough. So they then went to the Blacksall ship a couple of times. Oh, yeah. And one lady there, Daphne Gant, she said, what are you doing? She wasn't being snouty. She wanted to know what was going on. And this was for Ellie Pierce, who was playing Mrs. Lyons. And she said, well, this is what I've got. Would you like me to read your lines for you so you can copy me? And she read the lines out. Oh, it was lovely to watch. They went somewhere quiet. And she took a recording and all the mouth movements. And on the film, she sounds just like Daphne Gant. She really does. And one bloke, James, this was Joe Hurst, South Wales, who played John Jacobs, went to 2 workshops and he still sounded Welsh. Now, it was a low-budget film. They didn't have time to sort of re-budget or anything like that, or recast. So they paid for him to go from South Wales to Aldeburgh in a day. Then they paid me next day, get up early, go to Aldeburgh, sit there with him in the morning, and then go to Snake Market in the afternoon so he could practice it, and then paid for him to go back to South Wales the next day. He had 6 lines. And when it came to editing, the editor, he knocked 4 of those lines out. You shouldn't have laughed. You should have gone, oh, I know. But it worked. It really, really did. And for me, some special moments really did take place. We had, at the end of that shift I talked about, right? So there we are on scene at 6 o'clock in the morning, and we start filming at 8 o'clock in the morning, and we finish at 8 o'clock at night. Now then, what you've got to think about, and we achieved 6 lines. So if they take something for 10 o'clock in the morning and put it alongside something at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, then what we've really got to look at, the sun has still got to be shining in the same direction. So all through that day, these lighting boys are holding a reflector round, so the sun is always pointing in the same direction. But then when the sun is going down, the lighting boys are now putting on more light to make sure that it's still the same intensity as going on. The director wanted so many takes from this side, so many takes from that side, so many from the front, so many from the back. Right, about 35 takes each time. Then he wanted a drone go up in the air. So this drone goes up, and then so many takes from the top, so many takes from the front. Then they put a railway line down, so the cameraman can go along it, right? And I thought, I know him. And it was somebody from Coddenham. It was the Bickers family. So I thought, well, hello, how are you? And that was out of the question, because I shouldn't talk to anybody else than who I should speak to. Oh, it's very strict on there. So anyway, he's going up and down on the railway line. Then the railway line gets taken up, put down the other side. So it's now 8 o'clock. And it's going to be a volcano. You can see it. We're in unofficial overtime. Unions are just about to get involved, and it's about to hit the fan. And Ray Fiennes did something rather special. He stood up there. Now I've got about 80 odd. I'm standing next to him, and he just does that. And they all looked at him, and he just cracked off with a Shakespeare soliloquy in a Suffolk accent. Oh no, it wasn't funny at all. He didn't go, to be or not to be, that is the question. Whether it is, no, didn't do that. That was to be or not to be. That's the question. Whether that's noble in the mind. And he held them all the way through. And at the end, there was stunned silence. And 2 very experienced actors were crying because it was that good. I had goosebumps. It was fantastic. And he said, I don't know why I've done that. He said, I've been Hamlet. I've been every other part in Hamlet. I've even directed Hamlet. Royal Shakespeare Company, right? But doing that in a Suffolk accent, the rhythm was different. And the pauses were in a different place. And it took Shakespeare to a higher level than I've ever known before. And they all agreed. They said, yes, you brought it alive. So he's now standing there. And this is actually what happened. He said, because if you really look at the history of it, Shakespeare did not write in standard English, because standard English had not been invented. Right? Isn't that right, Charlie? I went, yeah, that's right. He said, no, Shakespeare wrote in a dialect, and wherever it was performed, it was done in dialect. Isn't that right, Charlie? I went, yeah, that's right. Now, I didn't know this was going to happen. So he said, so therefore, Charlie, how would have Shakespeare sounded like in the West Country? I went, pardon? He said, how would Shakespeare have sounded like in the West Country? Well, I worked with him long enough. I knew what he wanted me to do. So straight away, my horse, my kingdom for a horse. Then he said, and how would Shakespeare have sounded like in Birmingham? I went, where? He said, Birmingham. What would Shakespeare have sounded like in Birmingham? Well, I knew what he wanted me to do. Romeo, Romeo, wherefore art thou, Romeo? Well, that's what they all did. They laughed. He said, right, cheerio together, see you in the morning. Right, and we all came down and we didn't have any arguments at all. That was a magic moment. That really, really was. But I've also found out that whilst, now bearing in mind it's coming up Christmas time, bearing in mind, because every time I've told this story, there's been, oh, from the audience, right? I have found out that because there is a love scene in this film companies are now duty-bound to employ what is called an intimacy coordinator. Right. Because there's a love scene in this film companies are now duty-bound to employ what is called an intimacy coordinator. Yes. So there I am out on location. And I was so proud of Ray Fiennes, well, Basil as I'm calling him, because he came out with a Suffolk one-liner and kept a deadpan face. Oh, I was so proud of him. So there I'm out on location, and I'm with John Jacobs and Mr. Spooner. And Mr. Spooner is now practicing his Mrs. Pretty's Mounds bit. If you ask me, a man should leave. Come on, get the lips right. And we've got hand mirrors while we're out on location, right? Now watch. If you ask me, right? If you ask me, a man should leave, right? Mrs. Pretty. And over there's a lady watching us, and we're doing this for about 15 minutes. John Jacobs, Miss Spooner, and off they go. This lady walks up and she said, "That was really interesting watching you. You must be the Suffolk dialect coach." I said, "You're quick." I said, "Yes, I am. What do you do?" She said, "I'm the intimacy coordinator." I said, "What's one of them?" She said, "Well, because there's a love scene in this film, they are now duty bound to employ someone like me. And it's my job to ensure that the love scene is done properly." I said, "Oh, I know what you do then." She said, "What's that?" I said, "You make sure that everything comes together at the same time right at the end." She said, "Nobody's ever described my job quite like that before." I said, "Well, they must have done. Charlie, I got to go now." And off I go. So there he is riding his bike again, going up and down by the riverside. And I'm making notes as he's saying stuff and hand it to the script supervisor. And after about another 40 takes, cut, finish. So he's way down there. So I'm going to stand back and wait for him to come up so we can have a little chat about how it went and how we could improve it a bit. So I'm standing there, and as I'm standing there, Lily James walks past. Then Johnny Flynn walks past because they're going to have a love scene down the lane there, by which time I've now got the intimacy coordinator there. And she said to me, "I'm still laughing at the way you described my job because nobody's ever described it like that." Well, they must have done. But which time I've now got Basil standing next to me. And this is how the conversation went. "Oh, Charlie. Oh, Basil. You know who you're talking to, don't you?" "Yes, I do. She's the intimacy coordinator." "You know what she do, don't you?" "Yes, I do. She makes sure everything comes together at the same time, right at the end." He looked at her and went, "That's nice when that hams." Kept a dead straight face. I'm standing there with a dead straight face. And she looked at us two and she said, "Good God," she said, "I can see you two have worked together for a long while." Well, about a fortnight later, right, I've got a weekend off. So I'm down on the Shotley Peninsula, a place called Harksted Farmers Market, and I'm doing a book signing session. And halfway through the book signing session, there's a lull in proceedings, and these three blokes I know come up to me and I went, "Charlie, you got any new stories about the dig?" I went, "Yes, I have." I said, and I told them about the intimacy coordinator. Right, I said, because there's a love scene in this film, they've got to employ someone called an intimacy coordinator. By which time I've now got an 85-year-old lady in front of me with her husband. And she said, "A what?" I said, "An intimacy coordinator." She said, "What's one of them?" So I told the story. I said about making sure everything comes together at the same time right at the end. I then came out with a punchline, "That's nice when that happened." These three blokes laughed, but this lady didn't. And out of respect for this lady, those three blokes stopped laughing immediately. But what I could see and they couldn't was a glint in this lady's eye. And when they stopped laughing, she put her hand on the table and went, "Oh, I wish I'd had an intimacy coordinator on my..." "I wish I'd had an intimacy coordinator on my honeymoon," she said. Now, Ruth and I have noticed when we have a mixed audience, more ladies laugh than what the men do. Yes. We've had some wonderful, wonderful feedback. And like I said before, Ray Fiennes had never, ever known anything like it. Little things like this. I had hundreds of them. He had hundreds, right? And I know he's wiped away a few. When you get things like this, "Dear Mr. Fiennes, you gave us back our Uncle Walter. Thank you." What a film. Now, I know this bloke, he's 6'7". "What a film. You made me cry. Your mannerisms reminded me so much of my late father. Not just the dialect, but the delivery. Typical Suffolk. Thinks a lot, says little." But we had them from Australia, we had all over. There was a whole list of them. And he was overcome by that. He said, "I've never known anything like that." Normally it's the trade press, normally it's film critics, but never from the general public. I've never, ever had so much from the general public, if any, before. But this is just way beyond anything I ever dreamt of. He was overcome by it. I know he was. Netflix have never known anything like it. For the first time ever, they employed me as a dialect coach to go and help with the publicity. Right? They've never done that before. Right? And there I was being filmed with Martha Kearney down at Sutton Hoo. And that was for BBC Radio 4 Today, yeah. And on there, it ended up being in the top 3 funniest interviews for the year, because we're standing there, right, and they're filming it as well as it being on the radio, but then it actually got put on their podcast or whatever so people could see it. And I'm trying to get her to blow. So, hello, my dear, I'm trying to get her to say. I said, blow me a kiss. So all the time she's trying to talk to me, to get her to push her lips out, she's blowing me a kiss, because we didn't have mirrors at the time. So eventually, and it came out so funny that was on, one of their funniest. Got nominated for 5 BAFTAs. I know, got nominated for 5 BAFTAs. Are there any questions you would like to ask me about the film? Any questions before I got yes?
Hang on, let me give you the microphone so that everyone can. No, I'm sure you
I would have
better-
repeated
it's
it.
better for people in the audience.
Okay. Hi.
Hello.
God.
Hi.
Told you I'm loud. Is that a standard length of time that it takes to make a film, like 6 months? Or with your input, was it twice as long? And the second one is, where's the pub? That pub?
No,
where
in
is
fact, it was a low budget film, and in fact, films take longer than that. Oh yes, and in fact, one particular person didn't need training in a Suffolk accent, and she was the clairvoyant, and she had had a part in Grantchester, and I'd met her 15 minutes before she was going to go on, and she said, because Grantchester is South Cambridgeshire, South Cambridgeshire is exactly the same as Suffolk, so I'm going to do my Grantchester accent, and that will be it. I said, right, in your Grantchester accent, can you tell me that you are the barmaid of the Bay Horse, and would you like a pint of bitter, sir? She said, I'm barmaid at the Bay Horse, would you like a pint of bitter, sir? I said, that's a West Country. She said, no, it's not. Went on the film, and she only did a couple of 3 lines. The director was so incensed, he knew that wasn't a Suffolk accent, and he just cut it completely from the script. He really did, because they didn't have time to recast. It was a low-budget film. Normally, they would have done a lot more filming for it. They really would have done. And my involvement was only because the actors had gone to them. Now, normally, with a dialect coach, you're in there just for something like a day, and that's it. And you hope them to get. But Ray Fiennes knew it was different. The other actors knew it was different. And they all said, now we're talking about Monica Dolan. She's been that one with the bloke who lost or hid his boat up somewhere, pretend to be killed. She had a northeast accent. Then she was in, when she was doing Mr. Bates versus the post office. So she was in, so she's good at, she said, this is the hardest accent I've ever had to do, because we're resonating at the front of the mouth and push the lips out. No other accent does that. Right. And so therefore I was there a long time, but the filming was a short film. Long question, well, short question, long answer, I know. Any other questions, please? Someone up there, is it?
Just 2 more questions, probably, I think.
Sorry?
We've got time for about 2 more questions, Charlie.
That's 10-8, isn't it? Okay, right. Was there a question at the back there? No? Right. Well, I've got, have you found one with a question? Go on then.
Hi, considering it was quite a low budget movie, why did they care so much? Because most TV programs and films don't care about getting a Suffolk accent, right?
I had Ray Fiennes on board. I had Monica Dolan on board. And when I showed them that film, or what was on BBC, about the Raiders of the Lost Past and the importance of Sutton Hoo, that's when they turned around and said that this has got to be right. This has got to be right. And then they realised, because Ray Fiennes had said, look, nobody gets this accent right. And then they realised that Suffolk had to give it the thumbs up. And if Suffolk didn't give it the thumbs up, they knew that was going to be a flop. They knew that. So that's why they were coming up with them suggestions. And then with me on board, I wasn't going to, because I'd criticised it before with other films in the East Anglian Daily Times and on my programme on BBC Radio Suffolk. So with me on board, I would have walked away from it. But it was too late because they wouldn't get another one in. So they were going to stick with it. So there was lots of things going for it. And the accolades that they've got when you get things like that, you know, you gave us back our Uncle Walter. You were like my late father. We know we've hit it. Couple of 3 words if you're a purist, but generally, yeah. Any other questions? One question. Yes. Gentleman in the middle there, this is going to be the last question. Well, there's not, because I've got 2 questions for the audience.
Brilliant talk. You've talked a lot about how you view Ralph Fiennes. When Ralph Fiennes does his talks, what does he say about you?
I can answer that because he came up to my 60th talk, and I'll show you what sort of bloke he is, right? He had just done 5 months in London, every night of the week, on stage, every night of the week except a Sunday night, but Saturday there was also a matinee, 5.5 months. He contacted me and said, Charlie, what is the Suffolk dialect word for buggered? I said, it's roughly the same. He said, I want to come and see your talk about the dig at Wobbleswick. I want to be part of the audience. I said, right. He said, no, it's your show, not mine. So can you reserve 3 seats by the door so when everything has all been set up, I can then slip in and you can start your talk. Please don't put reserved Ray Fiennes. Can you put reserved Charlie Haylock guests? This shows you what sort of bloke he is, right? And I said, will you do questions at the end though? He said, I'll do questions at the end, but not involved. So just about to start, slipped in, sat down. A couple of people saw him and I said, there's going to be questions at the end. And then there'll be 2 of us because I didn't want any of them to turn around and say, have you seen who's just come in here, right? So right at the end, I said, right, there's going to be questions. There's going to be 2 of us. All I did was, but before I started, cheeky bugger, right, I just looked at him and he looked up at me and he went, and yeah, it did, right? So I got to the end, I went like that, up he came. Then everybody realized, I said, for those that don't know, he's the one on the left, right? And asked the questions, then this lady say, what's it like to be upstaged by your dialect coach, Mr. Fiennes? He said, well, I wasn't upstaged by my dialect coach, was I? It's Charlie in the dig, not Ray Fiennes in the dig. It's his show. So therefore, how can I be upstaged when it's his show? And he's done a really good job. And then he waxed lyrical about, we never talk louder than this. Even when things were flying on set, when tempers were flying, we never ever got louder than this. Even when the subject matter in the film was tense, we still kept at it, right? And he said, if I ever have another part with a Suffolk dialect, he's my man. And she went, oh, and sat down. So that'll give you some idea of what, and we've kept in contact since. So that gives you some idea. Right, I have got 2 questions for the audience. How many of you seen the film? Fantastic. Did you hear any West Country Pirates? No. Did you hear any West Country Pirates? No. Thank you very much indeed.